Minecraft the Dragon by Nicky Drayden. Chapter 1. Zeta hid behind a cactus at the edge of the town square, waiting for the last few townspeople to finish up work and return home for supper. The shadows in the desert town of Sienna Dunes were growing long as the sun dipped low in the sky. The sand beneath Zeta's feet started to cool, and the breeze suddenly became crisp as the heat of the day drained away. Zeta bundled up the collar of her blue tunic with one hand and kept her other hand firmly against her leather pack, which held her entire inventory of glass bottles, netherwort, and her prized brewing stand. She was the greatest potioneer Sienna Dunes had. Well, she was the only potioneer Sienna Dunes had. One day, however, she would be great, but first she needed to practice. And to practice, she needed to fill these water bottles without getting caught. In the middle of the town square stood a sandstone tower with small windows cut all the way to the top, and at the highest point hung a big brass bell to rally the townspeople in case of an emergency. In the bell tower's shadow sat the town's only well. Water was scarce and highly valued in the desert, and taking more than your fair share was frowned upon. If people saw Zeta filling her bottles up too often, they'd get suspicious and start poking around in her business. She couldn't let anyone find out that she was experimenting with potions. Not yet. Especially not her father. Zeta watched carefully as all the shop owners in the square began to pack away their outdoor displays. The grocer put away her fruit stand, carefully storing away the melons and berries and exotic apples for the next day. The owner of the slime shop bundled up his slime balls and shoved a display of slime cubes into a chest. And on the north side of the square, right near the town hall, the bookshop vendor signed as he flipped through the last few pages of a book, then placed it back onto a lonely bookcase. Apparently, he used to run a whole library, until the people of Sienna Dunes lost their curiosity about the world and got stuck in their ways. Now, the old library was a cactus nursery, like Sienna Dunes needed any more of those. Finally, the square was nearly clear. Zeta ran over to the well and stood next to it, trying not to seem suspicious and failing badly. Her hands were shaky, and her eyes were darting all over the place. Carefully, she slipped her hand into her pack, pulled out a glass bottle, and uncorked it. Just as she was leaning over to fill the bottle, Zeta heard footsteps clomping in the sand, getting closer. She straightened up and shoved the bottle back into her pack, then looked to see Mayor Maxine walking right towards her. "Another beautiful evening in Sienna Dunes," Mayor Maxine announced to no one in particular. She stood tall and dignified, and she smelled of the kind of delicate flowers that would instantly wilt under the desert's harsh sun. "Very beautiful," Zeta quickly agreed. "I'm just sitting here, enjoying the breeze, and definitely not trying to steal or borrow. Takes a little water to make potions in a town that doesn't think too highly of potioneers. And the wall is coming along nicely, if I do say so myself. I appreciate your work in the terracotta mines. It's people like you who keep this town safe." Mayor Maxine looked down at Zeta in the kind of way that said, "Why yes, I'm the mayor, thank you for noticing." Zeta became instantly aware of the orange terracotta dust that covered her brown skin. She felt the grit upon her eyelashes, in her coily black hair, in her socks. She inhaled so much of it during her mining shifts that she wouldn't be surprised if one day she sneezed an entire terracotta brick. "The wall is impressive, all right," Zeta said through clenched teeth. In truth, she thought the new wall being constructed around the town was an eyesore, but mining terracotta for the mayor's pet project had earned Zeta enough emeralds to afford a brewing stand, so she couldn't complain too much. "Keep well, citizen," Mayor Maxine said, and then she was off with a hasty walk that was more like a horse's trot. Zeta breathed a sigh of relief. She turned around and quickly filled her bottle. She didn't even understand what the big deal was. The well never seemed to run low. Once she'd helped her grandpa fill 10 whole buckets, and the water level hadn't even gone down an inch. Zeta startled when she felt a touch on her shoulder, and she nearly fumbled the glass bottle into the well. She caught it at the last moment, then turned to see her father standing there, barrel-chested and fierce, with a strange kind of charm. He was the kind of guy who crowds parted for. "Dad, Zeta's tongue suddenly felt too large in her mouth. She needed an excuse, something quick, so he wouldn't ask too many questions about the water bottle. The town's blacksmith had her store set up right across from the well. In the storefront window, behind a "No Enchantment" sign, dozens of weapons and tools were displayed, made from both stone and iron. Zeta knew for a fact there were diamond tools too, but those were kept locked up safe in the back. "I was just about to check on the price of an iron pickaxe," Zeta blurted out. "I've been thinking of ways I can be more efficient in the mines." The stern look on her father's face crept into a thin smile. His eyes sparkled. "Finally getting serious about the job, eh?" Zeta almost felt bad about how proud her father suddenly seemed of her. She was the daughter of the mining foreman, so everyone expected her to love mining and be as good as her father was. But mining was the last thing on Zeta's mind right now. It was pretty much always the last thing on her mind. Zeta cleared her throat. Gotta go before the shop closes. See you at supper." Then Zeta ducked inside the blacksmith's and pretended to browse the iron pickaxes she couldn't afford. She watched through the window as her father milled about the town square, always moving, but never in a hurry. No way would she be able to fill her bottles at the well with him out there. She could try her grandparents' farm. That came with its own risks, but Zeta didn't have much of a choice now. She waited until her father got caught up in a conversation with the mayor, then darted out of the shop and sprinted toward the south end of town. The farm was a little oasis in what was otherwise sand and grit in the desert town of Sienna Dunes. Sugarcane stood stiff in the breeze, while the green tops of carrots swayed gently. Chickens clucked as they paced around the coop, eager for the next meal of seeds. A scarecrow made of some old fence posts, a hay bale, and a jack-o'-lantern stood guard over Papa's nice personal potato patch, which was noticeably larger than the potato patch that fed the rest of the town. And not 20 feet away, Zeta's cousin Ashton swiped his stone hoe feverishly at the waist-high wheat shafts that somehow managed to grow in the desert heat. He had to be nearly done with his chores by now, Zeta thought. She was running out of daylight, and she needed water. Plus, now that she was here, maybe she could gather a few more ingredients for her potions. Zeta had faith in herself that she wouldn't mess up this time. Her eyebrows had nearly grown all the way back from the disastrous explosion she'd caused during her first attempt at brewing. And now she was pretty decent at brewing awkward potions, though the only thing they were good for was sneaking up her bedroom for an entire day. Finally, Ashton gathered up all the fallen wheat into his inventory. He planted the bare spots with seeds, then turned up and headed off towards the chicken coop. Zeta breathed a sigh of relief, and then kept crouched as she snuck toward the little wheat field that kept the desert town supplied with crusty bread loaves and sometimes cakes and cookies. The familiar sand beneath her feet turned her brown soil, mushy and cool, despite the beating it took from the sun. Zeta tiptoed through the wheat until she reached the minuscule stream that served as irrigation. As Zeta knelt down next to the water, guilt started to worry her, so she reminded herself that she wouldn't take much. Not enough to fill the 3 bottles that she needed to practice her potion of swiftness. She hoped she'd have more luck with a simpler recipe. The potion of invisibility she made last night hadn't looked quite right, and maybe she'd been too nervous to test it out. Maybe the nether wart had gone bad. The stuff smelled somewhere between rotten mushrooms and a sweaty armpit, even when picked fresh, so it was hard to tell. Same for the fermented spider eyes, which Zeta kept in a chest all by themselves, since they were so awful to look at and always seemed to stare back at her. The sugarcane Zeta needed for the swiftness potion was clear across the farm, and Ashton was right in her way, chasing a couple of chickens that had escaped from the coop. It didn't take him long to lure them back with a handful of seeds, though. Ashton has a way with animals. Every pig, sheep, and chicken loved that kid. He was especially loved by Ginger, the town's only cow. Unfortunately for Zeta, that was because Ashton had been giving each of his animals lots of love. Now he was sitting cross-legged, petting each chicken in turn and humming a little song to them. The song seemed to go on for an eternity, but Zeta had to wait him out if she wanted to get the sugar. The sandstone homes of Sienna Dunes were packed so closely that Zeta could have leaned out of her window and into one of her neighbors to ask for a cup of sugar. Her neighbors were nice, and though they didn't have much, everyone shared what they could. But they also gossiped, like their lives depended on it. And the last thing Zeta needed was them blabbering to her father and him discovering that she was messing around with magic. Then he'd have to tell the mayor, and the mayor would give her a very stern talking to, reminding her of the importance of living a simple life, free from the distractions of things like potions and redstones and enchantments and pretty much anything interesting. Which was kind of why the new wall bothered Zeta so much. The mayor said it was for keeping hostile mobs out, but other than husks and skeletons and the occasional pillager raid, Sienna Dunes was perfectly safe. Zeta suspected the wall wasn't so much about keeping mobs out, as it was for keeping people in. There were so many interesting things outside of their little town, but not many people had dared to leave it. Zeta's Aunt Meryl was one of them, but Zeta barely remembered her, since she hadn't been much more than a toddler when Aunt Meryl had run off to the mountains to the north. Finally, Zeta got an idea. Probably a bad one, but if she was really going to be Sienna Dunes' greatest potioneer, someday she might as well start believing in herself right now. Instead of waiting out her cousin Ashton, she could use one of her invisibility potions to sneak past him, unseen. She took a glass bottle out of her inventory, the liquid inside shimmering a pale lavender. It looked pretty enough, but when she uncorked the bottle, the pungent smell hit her immediately, making her gag. After a few deep breaths, she gathered her senses, pinched her nose, and gulped down the whole thing. Her entire body tingled, like she was being tickled by a swarm of silverfish. What was this magic like? Had her potion worked? Was she invisible? She waved her hand in front of her, but didn't see anything. An eerie feeling surged through her, a wobble in the pit of her stomach, like she was standing on the edge of a steep cliff. She stood up in the wheat field, no longer shielded by the gold-brown shafts. Now she could safely sneak past her cousin without risking getting caught. If he saw her, he'd tell their grandparents, and they'd tell Zeta's dad, and she'd be done for. But now she was safe. She crept her way through the wheat field, then the potatoes, and kept going until she was walking behind Ashton. How long would the potion last? Zeta wasn't sure. She was still a novice at potion making, a noob, as her cousin would say. Still, she was excited and couldn't believe this was working. "Who's a good chicken? Who's a good little chicken?" Ashton asked as he petted the bird right beneath her bright red wattle. "Salma is. Yes, she is." Salma clucked and flapped her wings. "And who's the sweetest little chicken in the whole overworld?" he cooed at the other chicken. "Nella is. She is for sure." Nella nuzzled against Ashton's chest. "She's the sweetest." Ashton stopped, turned around. He looked straight at where Zeta was standing. She went as still as cobblestone and held her breath. Cousin Zeta?" Ashton asked. Oh no, her cover was blown. "You can see me?" she asked, disappointed. Yeah, some of you. Your head." His big brown eyes were as wide as saucers. "It's just kind of floating." "I must have rushed the brewing," Zeta mumbled. "Or I didn't use enough nether wart. Don't tell Nana and Papa. I was out here, okay? Promise me." "I promise I won't tell. If you let me go on your next mob hunting trip." Zeta sighed. and made her way towards the cow pen for a bucket of milk to undo her sloppy potion. Ashton ran along behind her. "You're too young to be out in the middle of the desert in the dark," Zeta said. "Maybe when you're older, you can—" "You've been saying the same thing since I was 8. Now I am older. I'm ready." "I know you think you are, but it's really dangerous out there," Zeta mumbled as she grabbed a spare bucket and opened the gate to Ginger's pen. The cow spooked as soon as Zeta entered, though, her being a disembodied head and all. Ginger ran clear across the pasture. Zeta didn't speak cow, but she was sure that Ginger's aggravated moos meant Zeta shouldn't be bothered making an attempt to sidle up next to the poor creature. She looked at Ashton. He was almost a teenager now, thin, but nearly as tall as she was. Head full of black curls and kind eyes and a fast mind. He was still naive in a couple of ways, talking about poison-breathing dragons and fiery blazes and ghastly gas, and always sketching them in those tattered old notebooks of his. Those were the imaginary creatures the adults made up to keep kids scared and too afraid to venture far from home. Zeta didn't believe in that sort of stuff anymore, but she had to admit her cousin was getting older, so maybe it was time to start including him in her adventures with her friends. She sighed again, then handed Ashton the bucket. "Okay, get me some milk and promise not to tell Nana and Papa I was here. And I'll talk to Rift and Rain about including you in our next outing. I can't promise they'll be happy about it, but I'll talk you up real good, okay?" "Deal," Ashton said. Zeta extended her hand to seal the deal with a handshake, which of course was useless since her hand was visible. Ashton didn't notice her gaffe, couldn't have noticed it, and he sprinted over to Ginger. He took a moment to calm the cow down, then came back a minute later with a bucket of warm milk. Zeta guzzled it, feeling the magic gradually drain from her veins, and then she was herself again, 100% opaque all over. It'd probably be a good idea to keep some milk on hand for any future mishaps, though he was quite sure things would go more smoothly from here on out. She returned the bucket to Ashton. She was all grins, but she didn't want to push her luck and ask for a bit of sugar. The swiftness potion would have to wait another day. "Zeta," came Rift's voice from back near the chicken coop. She turned and saw her best friends, twins Rift and Rain, sauntering back from a day trip out on their hunt. Rift was dressed head to toe in green leather armor he crafted himself from the pelt of rabbits. His black hair stood up in spikes, which he got to stay that way by slathering on several handfuls of green slime gel each morning. An ever-present lopsided grin often meant he was up to something. Rain wore a simple white tunic, with the lime green scarf draped around their neck, and a quiverful of arrows slung across their back. Zeta could tell that her friends had quite a successful zombie hunt. She could smell the rotten husk flesh they collected from where she stood. "Hey, Rift. Hi, Rain," she shouted, then suddenly remembered her promise to her cousin. Ugh, this was going to be awkward. Rain pulled a couple of bones from their inventory and tossed them to Ashton. "Here, for the crops," they said, before brushing their sleek black hair from their eyes. Zeta didn't understand how Rain could be so great of a shot, with a bow, and that thick curtain of hair, constantly obstructing their vision all the time. "Thanks, Rain," Ashton said. "Zeta, are you going to go ask your friends about me hunting with you, or what?" The excitement in his words caused Zeta's stomach to turn. "Hey, kid," Zeta said in a chirping voice. Totally fake. She knew she sounded sincere, but she couldn't turn back now. "You know, I saw that a few of the torches are out on the far side of the farm, over by the silo. Maybe you can go check them out for me? Replace them if necessary. Wouldn't want any husks spawning in town." Ashton frowned. "You're just trying to get rid of me, aren't you?" "No, You can't send Ashton off to the far side of the farm by himself." Rift intervened, a sly smile on his face. What if he runs into killer rabbits out there, or something? He's way too young. Ashton perked up. I'm old enough. I go out there all the time. I'll check on the torches. And if I do run into any killer rabbits, I've got this. He pulled out a stone sword and waggled it around. If there was one thing that got Ashton excited, it was make-believe creatures. The kid certainly had an overactive imagination, and right now, Zeta could almost see the adventure churning in his mind. I'll be right back, her cousin shouted. The sun was nearly set now, and the mobs would be coming out in full force soon. Ashton wants to come hunt mobs with us tonight, Zeta whispered to her friends. Rain quirked a bow. He's old enough, I think. I don't have a problem if he comes along this time. I'll keep him safe. Riff nodded. Sounds good to me. Zeta shook her head. She thought her friends would put up at least a little bit of a fight. But it's so dangerous out there, especially after what happened to his parents. Everyone remembered what had happened to Ashton's mom and dad. They were both miners, taking long day trips towards the Great Rift, an enormous canyon that ripped through the desert like a mile-long scar. At the bottom ran a stream of burbling lava, and deep, deep down the sheer cliffs there were exposed veins of ore, gold, diamond, iron, tempting the brave to seek out their fortunes. Ashton's parents had gone out on that adventure, but they never returned. It had left a scar running through their family, one just as deep as the canyon. I'm back, Ashton said, panting. That kid was ridiculously fast. Sweat glistened against his forehead. Did you ask them? Zeta laid a hand on Ashton's shoulder. I did. We all think you're still a bit too young. But soon, really soon, okay? The sad look Ashton gave Zeta made her wish she was really invisible. She knew how much this had meant to him. She grimaced, watching as he trudged away, kicking aimlessly at loose pebbles in the dirt. He was mad, disappointed, but he'd be safe here. Come on, let's go, Zeta said to her friends, before they could make a big deal out of her lot. In Sienna Dunes, family was everything, and they knew better than to insert themselves into family business. We've got some mobs to hunt. End of chapter 1.